I, Gaius Julius Caesar, was born into the Julii, a family of ancient patrician lineage. My father, Gaius Julius Caesar, and my mother, Aurelia Cotta, shaped my early years in ways that I would only understand much later. We lived in a modest home in the bustling district of the Subura, a place teeming with life and the struggles of Rome's lower classes. Though we claimed descent from Venus, the goddess of love, the reality of our station was humbler than the myth suggested. As a child, I was precocious, curious, and determined. My mother, a woman of keen intelligence, was my first teacher. She taught me discipline and the art of persuasion. She had a way of turning a simple conversation into a lesson, weaving stories of the gods, heroes, and the foundations of Rome with lessons in morality, loyalty, and ambition. My father, though less affectionate, instilled in me a sense of duty and the importance of legacy. Rome, in those days, was a city of contrasts. The grandeur of the Forum and the temples of the gods were set against the chaos of its crowded streets. Political turmoil simmered everywhere. As a boy, I would listen to the debates and arguments of men in the Forum, absorbing the intensity of their convictions. The civil wars between Marius, my uncle by marriage, and Sulla, his bitter rival, left an indelible impression on me. I was only 15 when my father died unexpectedly, leaving me as the head of our household. It was a weight I bore with a mixture of fear and resolve. The loss taught me that life was fragile, that fortune could turn against anyone, and that only through strength, cunning, and adaptability could one thrive in a world as ruthless as Rome. My early manhood was marked by danger and opportunity. At the age of 16, I was appointed Flamen Dialis, a priest of Jupiter, a position that came with strict rules and restrictions. This role, while prestigious, was limiting, and it was a far cry from the military and political ambitions I harbored in my heart. The true test of my resilience came when Sulla, now the dictator of Rome, began purging his enemies. As the nephew of Marius and son-in-law of Cinna, one of Sulla's staunchest allies, I was marked for execution. The order was clear: divorce my wife, Cornelia, or face the consequences. To Sulla, my marriage symbolized an allegiance to the populace, the faction opposed to his rule. But I refused. Love played a part in my decision, for Cornelia was more than a political pawn. She was my partner. Yet, my refusal was also a declaration of independence. I would not bow to Sulla or any man. For my defiance, my property was confiscated, and I was forced into hiding, moving between the homes of sympathetic relatives and friends. Sulla eventually pardoned me, but not before declaring, "There are many Mariuses in this young Caesar." His words, though meant as a warning, became a prophecy of my future greatness. With Rome no longer safe for me, I departed for the east, seeking refuge and purpose in the legions. My first assignment was under Marcus Minucius Thermus, the governor of Asia Minor. Here, I began to learn the art of war, not in theory but in practice. One of my earliest acts of valor came during the siege of Mytilene, where I saved the life of a fellow soldier in the heat of battle. For this act, I was awarded the civic crown, a prestigious honor granted for saving the life of a Roman citizen. It was a moment of profound pride, not just for the recognition, but for the affirmation that I could rise above my circumstances through courage and skill. My time in the East also brought me into contact with the world of diplomacy. While in Bithynia, I was sent to secure a fleet from King Nicomedes IV. Rumors of an intimate relationship between us would later haunt me, but the mission itself was a success, and I returned with the ships my commander needed. This early experience taught me that power was not always won through force. Persuasion and negotiation were equally vital tools. When I returned to Rome in my early 20s, the city was still reeling from Sulla's reign. His reforms had weakened the populace, but the seeds of dissent remained. I resolved to make my mark not as a soldier, but as an orator and politician, for I understood that words could wield power as effectively as swords. I studied rhetoric under Apollonius Molon, a master of the art in Rhodes. His teachings honed my ability to sway an audience, to inspire loyalty and fear with my voice alone. I learned that every gesture, every pause, and every word mattered. My speeches began to draw crowds, and my reputation as a rising star in Roman politics grew. But fame alone was not enough. I needed allies. I sought out Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, whose fortune could fund my ambitions. I also cultivated a relationship with Pompey, a general whose military successes had made him a hero of the Republic. These alliances were calculated moves, steps on the ladder to power. In the meantime, I held minor offices, including military tribune and quaestor, each role giving me insight into the workings of the Republic. My first wife, Cornelia, passed away during this period, a loss that weighed heavily on me. Yet, even in grief, I pushed forward, marrying Pompeia, a politically advantageous match that tied me closer to the aristocracy. By the time I was elected aedile, overseeing public works and games, I had become a favorite of the people. I used my position to lavish Rome with grand spectacles, cementing my image as a man of the people. Beneath the surface, however, I was carefully plotting my ascent, preparing for the moment when I could truly seize power. By the time I assumed command in Gaul, I was no longer a mere politician. I was a soldier, a tactician, and a man whose ambition could no longer be confined within the walls of Rome. The Senate had granted me governorship over Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum, territories on the edge of the Republic's northern frontier. To some, this was a calculated effort to keep me far from Rome's politics. To me, it was an opportunity to carve my name into history. Gaul was not a unified land. It was a patchwork of tribes, each with its own leaders, rivalries, and ambitions. Initially, my campaigns were focused on consolidation. In 58 BCE, the Helvetii, a migrating Gallic tribe, attempted to resettle in Roman territory. I confronted them near the Saône River, where I destroyed their forces and sent them back to their homeland. The victory was swift and decisive, a warning to others who might challenge Roman authority. My second great challenge came from Ariovistus, a Germanic king who had crossed the Rhine and threatened Roman allies. Negotiation proved impossible, for Ariovistus dismissed Rome's power and mocked our culture. I met him in battle near Vesontio, modern Besançon. It was a grueling fight, but my disciplined legions overwhelmed his warriors, and he fled back across the Rhine. These victories secured my position in Gaul, but they were just the beginning. Over the next several years, I launched campaigns that would take me to the edges of the known world. In 56 BCE, I crushed a coalition of Gallic tribes at the Battle of the Morbihan Gulf, using a fleet of hastily constructed ships to defeat the powerful Veneti navy. I marched into Britain in 55 BCE and again in 54 BCE, crossing the Channel in an audacious display of Roman power. Though these expeditions were more symbolic than strategic, they demonstrated the reach of Rome and of Caesar. The climax of the Gallic Wars came in 52 BCE at Alesia, where I faced Vercingetorix, a charismatic leader who had united the Gallic tribes against me. The siege of Alesia was a masterpiece of engineering and strategy. I surrounded the city with a double ring of fortifications, one facing inward to trap the defenders and another outward to repel reinforcements. The battle was brutal. At one point, the Gauls nearly broke through my lines, but I personally rallied my troops, leading a counterattack that turned the tide. When Vercingetorix finally surrendered, he knelt before me, his spirit broken. The conquest of Gaul was complete, and I returned to Rome a hero. Yet I knew that my enemies in the Senate saw my growing power as a threat. By 49 BCE, my enemies in the Senate, led by Pompey and the Optimates, were plotting to strip me of my command and prosecute me for alleged crimes during my consulship. The Senate demanded that I disband my legions and return to Rome as a private citizen. To comply would mean humiliation, exile, or even death. I faced a choice that would determine the fate of Rome and my own legacy. Standing on the banks of the Rubicon River, the boundary of my province, I hesitated only briefly. To cross the river with my legions was to declare war on the Senate, but to turn back was to surrender everything I had fought for. The die is cast, I declared as I led my army across the Rubicon. Rome descended into civil war. Pompey, once my ally, now stood as my enemy. He fled to Greece, where he gathered his forces. I pursued him relentlessly, moving with a speed and decisiveness that caught him off guard. In 48 BCE, at the Battle of Pharsalus, I confronted Pompey's army. Though my forces were outnumbered, my superior tactics and the loyalty of my soldiers secured a decisive victory. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was betrayed and murdered by agents of Ptolemy XIII. When I arrived in Alexandria, I was presented with Pompey's severed head. I was not pleased by this dishonorable act, but I quickly became embroiled in Egyptian politics. I supported Cleopatra VII in her struggle for the throne, forming both a political and personal alliance with her. Upon my return to Rome, I was hailed as the savior of the Republic. The Senate named me dictator, initially for 10 years and later for life. I wielded absolute power, but I sought not to destroy the Republic, but to reform it. My reforms were sweeping. I addressed the rampant debt crisis by passing laws that reduced the burden on debtors without alienating creditors. I redistributed land to veterans and the urban poor, stabilizing a society strained by inequality. I restructured the Senate, adding members from the provinces to reflect Rome's growing diversity. Perhaps my most enduring reform was the creation of the Julian calendar, a solar calendar that corrected the inconsistencies of the old lunar system. Yet, my concentration of power alienated many in the Senate. The old aristocracy, clinging to their traditions, accused me of aspiring to kingship. My acceptance of titles such as Father of the Fatherland and Dictator for Life only fueled their fears. The conspiracy against me grew in secret, even as I planned campaigns to expand Rome's borders further. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, I entered the Senate chamber, surrounded by men I believed to be allies. As I sat, the conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, surrounded me. The first blow struck my neck, and then the blades came in a flurry. I fought briefly, but as I saw Brutus among my assassins, I ceased to resist. Es-tu, Brute? I whispered, not in anger, but in sorrow. I fell at the base of Pompey's statue, a cruel irony, for it was Pompey's death that had solidified my power. My death was not the end of my vision. My heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus, avenged me and established the Roman Empire, fulfilling the destiny I had set in motion. The republic I sought to reform was transformed into a system that could endure the challenges of a growing empire. I am Julius Caesar, a soldier, a statesman, and a visionary. My life was a testament to ambition, strategy, and the indomitable will to shape history. Though I was mortal, my legacy is eternal, woven into the very fabric of Rome.